Today we are holding a seminar to take a look at the experience we have on a local and regional level in the context of economic crisis, how we have been able to develop policies which have proved successful. This is an opportunity to think over, against the backdrop of a world crisis, of how we can make progress. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Ole Schmidt and Ramon Tremoso, for their contribution to the organization of this seminar. We're going to start by considering the past experience in this area, and we do have some very interesting speakers here. Juan José Ibarretxe, who was the president of the Basque country, and still bears that title according to our legislation. And we also have Jordi Beget, who we will hear from later. I'd like to give the floor now to my colleague Ramon Tremosa, so he can say a few words. And later on he will present our speakers. Ramon, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to this small session. Let me take a few minutes to introduce this afternoon's seminar. Now, when you think of countries in the south of Europe, people tend to have a fairly stereotypical idea of our economies as being unable to keep up with the more advanced economies in the north of Europe. And I think today we have the opportunity to present two different economic models. On the one hand, the Basque model, and on the other, the Catalan model, who will show us that there is a possibility for countries in the south of Europe to move at the same pace as the more advanced economies in Europe. So I invite you to participate in this seminar here today, aware that perhaps the Spanish economy is not the most efficient when it comes to working together as part of the European economy, but we are able to be competitive and to have strong points in our economy. If you look at the Basque case, Michael Porter wrote several years ago some very interesting papers on the Basque tax system as a real pillar of competitiveness. And I think in 2005, if I'm not much mistaken, the Financial Times gave an award to the Basque government as the best regional authority in terms of economic affairs. Now, these are models which have been internationally recognized, and we think it's well worth taking time today to take a look at the current economic models, such as the Basque and Catalan models. Later on, we'll move on to hear from Jordi Beget, who will explain some of the strengths of the Catalan model. In Catalonia, we do not yet have such an efficient model, an independent tax model as the Basque country. We don't have such an, as I say, such an efficient and effective system of managing our own resources. But we do have a number of very strong cooperatives who are developing along the same lines. The Catalan economy does also have its strengths, which Jordi Beget will be explaining to us later. So you're all welcome here today to listen to what we have to hear from our speakers this afternoon. Thank you. Microphone for the speaker. I'll be giving the floor now to Ole Schmidt, who has a good deal of experience in the European Parliament In 1999, he was a member of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. He's also been a member of the Delegation for Relations with Japan and Slovakia, and a substitute for the Libe Committee. And he's also on the Committee for Women's Rights and Budgetary Control. Mr. Schmidt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege for me to be here together with these distinguished two colleagues, Irakun and Ramon. We visited Bilbao in the summertime, and it was a privilege, and it was a huge experience to see what you have done. I am actually living in a city where we had a shipyard, one of the biggest shipyards in the world, actually, and now we have none whatsoever. Sweden was the second largest shipbuilding nation in the world in the 70s, and I started working actually on a shipyard, but now we have none as well. And you have managed to succeed in Bilbao, and we are trying to do it as well. And I think that shows the experience of subsidizing different industries, production, and we should be cautious doing that. Guggenheim is, of course, an extremely well-known example of how to modernize and rebuild a city. To Ramon, I would say that I've always liked Barcelona. I've been there several times. My close friend Carlos Gasoliba. And I also, together with my son, watched the football team, of course. And I must say, I'm coming from Malmö, and you just sold Zlatan Ibrahimovic. That was a pity for us, but I hope that you will reckon that that was a loss anyway. And I got tickets for the Barca game in Copenhagen in a couple of weeks. As you know, we experienced the worst, actually, depression since the Great Depression in the 30s, and I think that this shows that actually we have to have a global approach, and I think that we have done reasonably well. There are always pessimists, and I'm used to say that I'm a liberal, so I'm an optimist. And I do think that even though the downturn was very sharp and very rapid, I think that you can see now that we have some light in the tunnel. And I do think that is actually important. If you are not saying that it's going in the right direction, psychologically, no one will say anything else. And I do think that you can see that the result is improving. One of the important consequences of the word financial crisis has been the serious deterioration of the fiscal position of governments around the world. And the ability to handle this crisis, as in previous crises, has been different for central governments and regional and local governments in Europe, I would say. Without sufficient ability to borrow money, regional governments facing some combination of lower own source revenues, cuts in transfers from the governments, and reductions in the value of their assets will find themselves in a very difficult situation, as you mentioned yourself. The most significant direct impact of the crisis has been on the regional and, I would say, local level, and composition of local governments' finances on both the revenue and expenditure side of their budgets. It has been a problem. Local governments in many countries have also been forced to reduce current expenditures, not only for maintenance and operation, but also for some categories that have been relatively unaffected in past crises. I think we can see that as well, such as social services and creating a huge unemployment. There is also another reason to be concerned. The crisis may have a negative, I say may have a negative impact of decentralization and local governance If budgets are reduced due to revenue shortfalls, local governments will be less able to meet their important responsibilities and will face an erosion of citizens' trust. I am living in an extremely centralized country. You are not. You are happy not to do that. But the crisis has affected all of us. At the same time, some countries, such as my own, have recognized the need to keep resources flowing to local governments during the crisis because of the important role they play in service delivery and the promotion of economic government. I would say that why I'm saying this is that my party is a part of the government, so I think they mostly are doing the right things. Mostly, I said. One key question I think has to be raised. Should municipalities, which probably have the least elastic spending among levels of government, fully bear their share of a drop in revenues in consolidated government revenues? There is a risk of ill-conceived structural reforms being pushed through under the pretext of dealing with a crisis, for example, re-centralizing services or reducing local autonomy for the sake of realizing cost reductions. And I think we will also address that in this afternoon. I think that there is a considerable need for more systematic analysis of the impact of the current crisis on local government finances. Such efforts would help central and local governments not only to better understand the depth of the nature of the problems being experienced, but also point to innovative ways that have allowed some local governments to cope with the crisis better than others. There are, to conclude, many lessons to be learned from the recent financial crisis, an economic and social crisis. The crisis had revealed gaps in some areas, and I will mention three: in legislation, in supervision, and in crisis management. We are dealing with all these issues in this House, as you know. And the question is merely if more regulation at EU level is really the answers to our questions. And my answer to that is a bit doubtful, and at least Ramon knows that I'm not in favor of regulating everything. I strongly believe we need a better regulation and a better legislation. Better regulation in the case of financial markets means increasing the transparency while avoiding provisions having a negative impact on market efficiency and thereby impairing the growth potential of the wider economy. Let me conclude by saying that I was in Parliament in Stockholm in the 90s, and we had a tremendous downturn. We were in the deepest crisis that our country has ever been in. We had an interest rate of 500%. And at that time, the governor of the central bank came every day to the Standing Committee of Finance and said, do something, do something. And we tried, but we didn't succeed. And in the end, he had a proposal of lifting the interest rate to 2,000%. But at that time, we thought that this was too close to be a banana republic, and we didn't want that to happen. And at that time, we introduced, after this enormous crash, a couple of proposals that actually is now being proposed in the whole of the European Union, about budgets, stricter budgets, and so on, and ex-ante provisions of examining the budgets and so on, and not giving the parliamentarians too much maneuver to add more costs to the national budget. Was this good or bad? This was, well, the question is wrongly put. It was necessary. Otherwise, the country would have collapsed. And therefore, of course, when we are examining this period in the Swedish history, you could say, well, they are very clever, those Swedes up in the north. But that is not the case. Some of us might, or some of others might be. But we had the problem, and we had to solve them. So the crisis actually created some innovative thinking. So therefore, we are better off at the moment. It's not that we are better skilled for dealing with crisis, not at all. We were the worst ones, but we had it in the 90s, so now we are better off. And perhaps some of the other countries could learn of this, but it's not because we were especially clever. That's what I say in a humble way, because we were so hard hit, and hopefully the fellow countries and fellow members of this parliament will see that their countries will not be as hard hit as my country were in the 90s. I will stop there by saying, as I said, I'm an optimist, and I would say that we're going to solve this. We're going to solve this in Europe, and we're going to solve it in a decent manner, both taking care of the local and regional level. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Ol.
Thank you very much, Oli, for those words. You really have given us food for thought. I'll now introduce Juan José Ibarreche. This is a very special presentation for me because aside from being someone who I've known for many years, he was also the president of the Basque country for 10 very important years for the economic, social and human evolution of this region. What more can I say about Juan José Ibarreche? Quite aside from being a very hard-working, tenacious person, he has very clear goals and has worked in several different areas. He was the mayor of Llodio, he was vice president of the government, and then president for 10 years. So he's very familiar with Basque history and the context of such a severe crisis in the Basque country that we had unemployment rate of up to 25%. And an income of 30% of the European average. Under his leadership over the last few years, a great deal has been achieved. We won elections in 2009, but with a pact with the Popular Party, the People's Party and the Socialists, and according to the rules of this pact, he was unable to continue as president of the region. Now, Mr. Basque has been a lecturer in several universities in Latin America and in the United States, and held important posts, and he has a lot to say about the situation and how to get out of situation of economic crisis. There are a few things, however, I could say about Mr. Ibarreche's career in the Basque country. He has shown a good deal of interest in the social and human aspects of economic development. We've heard him say it several times that if economic development is not does not go hand in hand with social development, with one eye always kept on the citizens, then it's worthless. His development has been based on cooperation between the public and private sector, which has allowed him to build up a network of SMEs which have supported a region and a country in a time of economic crisis. Innovation. Innovation and internationalization as ways out of a crisis, as ways to develop different projects and to place ourselves in a globalized world. And then a couple of points where I think he's worked almost obsessively. Firstly, equality. gender equality. He has pioneered some excellent policies. The Basque country passed the first gender equality laws under his leadership when he said that we all have to come together to fight for this, to fight for equality, because it will be to the benefit of all. He has also fought for peace, a peace which is not yet fully established in the Basque country, but we are convinced that it will be so in shortly. That's the desire of all Basque citizens and the desire of all people who support us in our struggle. I'll give him the floor.
Eskerrik asko izaskun maikideok etorritako guztioi arratzaldeon eta benetan esateko lehenengo eta behin hori handia dela niretzat benetan hemen Europako Parlamentuan egotia. Benetan nik sinesten dut Europarengan eta Euskal Herriak sinesten dulako.
We're sorry, there's not Basque interpretation.
I suppose that it's nearly impossible for you to understand my language because it's the Basque language. The most ancient language in Europe. As you know, the Basque country is a nation. We are not a state. As you say, a stateless nation. I don't like at all this concept. But in any case, we have our own culture, our own language. And there is a contradiction in the European Union, that the most ancient language in Europe is not yet an official language in the European Union. We have to solve it. In any case, I'll speak in Spanish, and then you have the translation into English and other languages. And in any case, the Basque language is the language of the Basque country, but it is not our only language, because the Spanish and the French languages are Basque languages too. Bien, se me ha pedido una reflexión.
I've been asked to give a half-hour talk on the economic crisis and the way out. In a sense, I'm doomed to failure in such an endeavour. So, really, I believe that we've got to be humble, because I don't think that we can sort this out in half an hour. And I think that intellectual honesty is the only way to tackle this crisis, any crisis. And I think another notion that must guide us is flexibility. Flexibility in terms of training systems, innovation, and flexibility on internationalization. I've made available to the group 72 slides, which I'll go through quickly, and I won't use all of them because otherwise I'll exhaust the time and leave no time for the next speakers, and we don't want that. Now, I'm basing my speech on looks, on observing and looking, and potential recipes for the crisis. Here's a comment which was made by Alain Touraine last week. Crisis within the crisis. If we don't find words that break with the silence and actions which move us beyond paralysis, crisis will be the fate of the West. Passivity and resignation are not just consequences, they are also causes, deep-seated causes. Now, I would entirely agree with Alain Touraine's diagnosis. But let's also be optimistic. More than 1,000 years ago in the Annus Mirabilis, Einstein said, the only really threatening crisis is the tragedy of not wanting to struggle to overcome it. In other words, passivity. The crisis we're facing at the moment is multifaceted. It's not just economic and financial. It has roots in a crisis of values. And it's got 7 heads like Hercules' monster. You've got to cut all 7 heads off the monster, otherwise it'll keep on growing and you'll keep on having a crisis which will grow in virulence. We've got poverty, climate change, multilateralism, food crisis, an energy crisis, financial crisis, and a cultural crisis. These are the 7 heads of the crisis monster, and we've got to slice all of them off if we want to really tackle the problem. So Above all, I'd say this is an ethical crisis, a cultural disaster. We've made it a universal value to get rich. But let me draw your attention to this. There's only one way to become richer by means of universal culture, and that is if we can all contribute with our own culture to universal culture. Merritt Ruland, who's a linguist at Stanford University, he recently said the following. Now, we Basques have overcome many crises and have had our identity threatened, but do you really think that of this prediction will come true, that the 5,000 languages that exist today will only be reduced to 500? There'll only be 500 languages. And we're seeing this cultural genocide. Do you think that is an enriching thing, that 500 languages better than 5,000? We had 6,000 50 years ago. Hardly. So we've got to take a long, hard, and critical look at the New World Order, because it's poverty that's been globalized, not progress. Violence is becoming more widespread rather than human rights. And of course, there is the mammoth stupidity that was the Iraq War. That was one of the major blunders of humanity in recent times. Mankind only meets with success after having made all the mistakes, is the old saying, and unfortunately that's what's happened. This so-called preventive war is a signal failure of showing how we're spreading violence, not human rights, and this is a major and very gross blunder. We're seeing a crisis of a crisis becoming globalized, a crisis of pride. And I think I'm in belief with that. We have entered this new century without a compass, but as Ortega Gasset said, we don't know what's wrong with us, and that's what's wrong with us. So, my vision, having made these initial preliminary remarks, is it's not just a question of fixing the economy. I'm an economist, but I think we'd be wrong-headed if we just aim to fix the economy. We need to build a new world order based on new rules, which would resolve imbalances, be they strategic, economic, financial, or otherwise. Now, some of these ideas were rejected recently, some of these ideas which are doing the rounds now. But we also got to take account of climate change and the ethical dimension, so that we build new relations between nations, within nations, between cultures. Dialogue at the end of the day must be intercultural in nature. We've got to build a new global reality, a new shared destiny, where everybody feels a sense of ownership, where people don't feel eclipsed or overwhelmed. Moving on. This is a useful critical comment, and this is from Alan Greenspan. He said, "The free market is not the panacea of self-regulation which I had worshipped all my life." I wish he'd said that 15 years earlier. He would have saved us all a great deal of trouble. Instead of guiding the financial fate of the world from this monolithic way of thinking. Confucius said 1,000 years ago. And I think this is a valuable reflection. When you achieve prosperity, don't spend it all. Well, we've done that. We've mortgaged our own future, that of our children, and also that of our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. That's my diagnosis of the crisis. Or to make a virtue of necessity, Michel Camdessus, a northern Basque who had considerable responsibilities in the financial system, recently said in San Sebastian that things only change when there's a crisis. A bit like what Einstein said. When the crisis arises, nothing changes. It's business as usual. And I think we have to adjust to the idea that we will go back to business as usual. At one time, people acknowledged that there was a crisis, that the market couldn't do things properly, that Hayek's dogma of self-regulation was failing. Smart economy. I said to my colleague now, he talked about state intervention, and don't forget that not even Keynes advocated full state intervention economy. Rather, the state has to correct the market, and the market has to correct the state. That's the balance that we require. Now, business as usual. I'm worried about G20. 85% of the GDP is accounted for there. That means a lot of people aren't represented. I really don't think that the G20... I'm being provocative here. This is an intellectual approach. I like to say that Bretton Woods wasn't destroyed by the UN, but it was destroyed by Reaganomics and other unilateral initiatives. We need a new regulatory system, and I think it's got to operate within the framework of the UN. But the G20 in recent times has opposed the three principles I've outlined. Humility, our vigorous response to stem the danger. And that's it, the crisis is over, they said. I say, really? How can you say that? Because what we're seeing in the media was related to consumption problems. Perhaps they were trying to prevent the media overplaying its hand. And they wanted consumption to be aware to the crisis. I'm more worried about this second statement because it shows terrible intellectual poverty. We didn't call into question the use of 3.3 billion euros to bail out reckless financial institutions that had been overmarked by equally reckless ratings agencies, thereby generating a danger of contamination. I mean, the argument they had was wonderful. Basically, they were going to take them down with us, all our economies, your pension plans, yours is as good. In fact, everybody's in this room's pension plan. The United States intervened quickly. Europe, as all too often happens, came in with doing too little, too late. But I think it's really over the top that the G20 is suggesting that public expenditure is not productive. Of course, it wasn't productive when you have to spend 3.3 billion to bail out the financial institutions. And now, of course, what do we do about the 100 million unemployed people that have been generated by the crisis? We need to promote the real economy, industrial policy, innovation policy. I mean, surely now, more than ever, we need public spending. But they say, oh no, it's not productive. Europe has been infected or affected by neoliberal recipes which do not work. Suddenly we see we've become converts to these neoliberal credo. And the third point, it really takes the cake. Flexibility. The World Bank and IMF, who didn't engage in regulation, we're asking them, well, can you please go ahead and do some regulation, please? And also without much change in terms of their general approach. I beg your pardon. A friend said to me, it's a bit like asking Count Dracula to manage the blood bank. So we've got to be self-critical, but I think we need to have a degree of self-esteem and self-confidence. We need both. A Basque theologian had some great ideas. You don't mind if I show a bit of pride in our local people. He said in Basque, well, if you're going on the wrong road, don't go too fast. Einstein said the problem cannot be solved with the same type of thinking that created it. And that's, in a way, what we're doing at the moment. We're not engaging in a rethink. We're not calling into question the disastrous productive model. What we're trying to get out of the crisis, the multifaceted crisis, by more of the same. Economically speaking, I think this debate is essential. What you have here, and that's essential for the economy. In the 70s and 80s, we had to explain that change could not be just accepted passively in the European Union. There were countries that grew and others did not, but there were sectors which are in the vanguard, others which are not. How can we account for that? If we believed in this degree of economic determinism, then everybody would react in the same way. Well, of course, that's obviously not the case. Now, obviously, the choices you make in terms of what education you do, what courses you will determine your career, well, it's also the case for a country. If the kind of mechanisms they have in place will determine the future. That's regional economy. And I think it's this other debate that we need to tackle. I think it really is the heart of the matter. That's going from the economy to the economic ethics. Human development, sustainable human development. It simply is not the case that growth equals development and that development equals happiness. That is not true. It is a falsehood. So I think from academia and from the economic authorities, we must spell that out loud and clear. Growth won't necessarily generate wealth, and the wealth would generate consumption and felicity, because at the end of the day, there's always one thing in the supermarket more than you can afford. You're not going to be happy just through consumption. When Barack Obama went to the Congress and spoke at the end of adoption of a very timid healthcare reform package, he said, do you think that a country that has the highest per capita income can afford to have 50 million people outside healthcare? Is that a developed country? Well, I can answer for him. No, it isn't. That's why we've got to think these things through. I'm fond of quoting geniuses. José Saramago was also a great friend. And he put it very well in his wonderful book, The Cave. The old potter's shop was replaced by a shopping center. We'd said everything everything you needed if we didn't prefer you to buy what we think you need. So human development has to be sustainable. It's got to be based on four main ideas: identity and culture, because those that don't know where they come from cannot know where they're going. Now, identity isn't a legitimate political project, but it's also the guarantee anywhere in the world for the achievement of sustainable economic development. Human development is entirely and directly related to deepening one's identity, equality, people with faces going forward together, perhaps more slowly, but we'll go further. And here, equality between men and women is essential. People are like birds. We need both wings to fly. You can't hope to build with 50%, particularly as you can build with 100%. And don't forget one point, just like birds, don't forget, they can live with a wounded wing, but they certainly can't fly. But we in the European Union need to use both wings. And to do that, we need both wings. You can survive with just one wing, but you can't fly. Participation in politics and economy, participation is essential. Participation of citizens in politics, in building their societies, and also the participation of workers in building the economy. Because at the end of the day, your children won't live with you if they don't share your life. Because if people feel that politics is not relevant to them, and that happens a lot with the EU and the EU institutions, then you're in trouble. And I think the 30% turnout in European Parliament elections is very saddening. I don't think you can have a greater proof that you're not doing a job properly than that. Anyway, the Basque case. We've shown, yes, we can. We can look at the market without losing sight of people. It's not true what the neoliberals said, that this is the natural order of things. That's not something we should accept without criticism. Things can be done differently. So what we use is identity and self-government. In the Basque case, we've been able to organize the lives of our citizens better, and that has allowed us to develop welfare and wealth in our society. Secondly, training and education. We need properly educated and properly trained people. That's essential, an essential component of positive developments in the Basque country. 81% of our men and women aged 21, 24 have a secondary or tertiary education, because people who are educated have a capacity to be critical, and they want to accept corruption, and they can also ensure that things run smoothly in society and the economy. I mean, you can't go back from that. Now, innovation and internationalization ties in with training and education. These are two ideas that go hand in hand with each other. A country that doesn't innovate can't become international, and conversely, the same holds true. Internationalization, innovation, and training are more relevant to natural areas than the nation state. So that's why we need new regional innovation systems. That's why that is something that allows us to react locally to global phenomena. And finally, participation and equality. Now, we have a lot of initiatives that we rolled out, and I'd take up a lot of your time in outlining them, but you'll get them in my information package. Now, SMEs are essential. They account for 80 to 90% of our productive fabric. We can't innovate if we don't do things on the basis of SMEs and their dimension. This hasn't been taken account in taxation and reform of the labour market, regional policies, R&D, technological literacy. This is a revolution across the sectors. It doesn't matter if you're a poultry farmer, a cattle farmer, or you're engaged in nuclear fission. You need to be technologically literate rather. E-work, cooperation, and innovation. Innovation in groups, that's a fundamental challenge. That's something we've focused, and our research centers are based on a cooperative approach. In the 80s, we learned to compete. In the 90s, we learned to cooperate. And I think in the 21st century, we should focus on innovation based on cooperation and cross-fertilization between all agents in the science and technology and innovation system. That is to say, universities cannot act on their own and take their own decisions on what kind of areas they want to research into. Neither can governments, be they local or central, that determine what they're doing. There's got to be a proper joined-up approach to innovation. Now, the key is businesses, universities, and government all need to work together. We shouldn't work off in our own corner, ignoring what others do. I mean, it's incredible the level of ignorance that exists about this. People in business don't know what the universities get up to, and vice versa. Cross-fertilization, therefore, is essential. Here's a slide which shows how the social subsystem, which is governance, social cohesion, culture, and identity, innovation social. We've got the physical system, town planning, energy efficiency, and so forth. And we've got the economic subsystem, the creative industries, talent, innovation. You can see how these link up and contribute to a project which leads to the growth of the country. That's what we've been doing in the Basque Country on the basis of this new architecture. The Basque Council of Science, Technology, Innovation engaged in a lot of innovative thinking. We received contributions from the EU, and I've had a lot of visitors from the EU. And this council is a meeting point for anybody who's involved in innovation. People from the government, and the president of the Basque Country, together with the main universities. 4 rectors were in this group as well, to take the leaders from the Innovation Center also sat on this council, and together with them, the president of the Basque Academy. All these people were grouped together in the council and took strategic decisions on innovation. Now, don't forget, diagnoses are easy. You've got to also translate them into policy decisions backed up with a budget. Here are 2 tables. This is what's happened between 1998 and 2007. I don't know if you can see terribly well. We were 115%, with a third in the ranking Europe. Actually, the second now that Ireland is not doing so well. We've moved on to 138% of income. That's about $46,000 per annum. Spain and France are 2 reference countries because the Basque Country straddles the Pyrenees. In Spain, we went from 95% to 106%. So that's an 11% higher than the average. And in France, from 115 to 111, so that's 4% loss. Now, of course, the United States lost 4%. Japan also down, as did Germany, 9.5%, Italy down 18.8%.
Ranking de desarrollo humano, no solo.
In terms of human development, this is well worth taking note. Now, Sarkozy made a request, and that is that let's not measure consumption and production. Let's take account of other factors pertaining particularly to human development. This Human Development Index allows us to get an idea, though it's incomplete and has its shortcomings. Balance, democracy, sustainability are 3 factors together with equality that are not covered here. It looks at things at training, life expectancy, income. In any event, we called on the United Nations to rank us. It's states that are usually ranked, and here you go. Here's the official UN ranking in the 2012 report. The Basque Country would be number 3 after Norway and Iceland. I'm sure you haven't heard about this at all. So a new look, a new approach. Science, research, creativity, innovation, culture. CICIC would be the acronym in Spanish, and that gives you the solutions. Here is an excellent epigram of a very famous physicist, president of the San Sebastian Physics Center, and it's quite a witty saying: today the wealth of nations depends on the wealth of notions. We must be humble too, as I say, because at the end of the day, the limit between what is known and unknown is the area where researchers intervene. David Ben-Gurion, he said that all the experts I know are experts on the past. There are no experts on the future. I think we've got to overcome our fear of getting things wrong. I mean, remember what Michelson said. We already know all the laws of physics. What about Ferdinand Foch? He said 1911 that planes are interesting toys, but they have no military value. Remember what Thomas Watson said? I think there's a global market for maybe about 5 computers. Look at what Ken Olsen said. I don't see any reason at all why anybody would want a personal computer. And remember what Bill Gates said in 1985, 640K will always be enough. So let's be humble in terms of weighing things up. Remember what Keynes said, a towering giant of economics. He said something which is very valuable. Back in 1926, 3 years before the crash, he said, the economic ills of our time are the result of risk, uncertainty, and ignorance. Well, risk and uncertainty will always exist. They existed throughout the 20th century, and they will continue to do so. But on what variable can we intervene on the last one? Ignorance. That's what we can fight against in administrations and in business. So the major problems of the 21st century, poverty, health, energy, intolerance, equality, identity, cannot be solved by less science, rather by means of more education and more science. So we need to take a long, hard look at the educational system, flexibility and adaptation. We look at the university system. That's not just about knowledge, but learning about how to solve problems. And the question is that the case? I think at the moment it isn't the case. It is true to say that European universities have overcome one of the major threats or criticisms they receive from their American counterparts. They say, well, you're all generalists. You train people for what? But in 2010, it has been forecast that people would change specialization 14 times before they're 38. Well, that means we need specialists of one thing today and another thing tomorrow. So the educational system must provide the tools that will allow people to make these choices. Every 2 years, there is a renewal in scientific knowledge. So that means that an engineering student, when he graduates, will have his head full of already obsolete knowledge, and we've got to allow him or her to renew that. And then flexibility is the key there. But don't forget that creativity isn't just knowledge, it's will, it's action. It's love for what you do, the passion for knowledge, creativity. It's a human adventure, and also cooperation. You can't learn on your own. You can only really learn from people who do things well.
Decidir.
Solving problems, deciding, communication, teamwork, information technologies, passion for learning. That's what's essential today. Throughout your life, from cradle to grave, the idea that training and learning only takes place in our youth. Well, today there are professionals of a very poor quality that were wonderful students, and vice versa. There are wonderful professionals that were no good as students. So a passion for knowledge. And Peter Zenger said that by means of knowledge we recreate ourselves. And it doesn't matter what age you are. That means we can do what we were unable to do before. So the future means trained people, flexible people who can engage in critical thinking with intellectual courage and a strategic vision of future, people who are going to be a source of innovation, creativity for our universities, for our industry, for our businesses and for our society, and who by osmosis will transmit a different kind of culture, not the get-rich-quick culture, wanting to buy an Audi as soon as you got a new job. No, it's a question of a culture of excellence. So I think one of the major paradigm shifts in society is that now we've gone from choosing to being chosen. Previously, it was political parties and churches and was banks that chose their parishioners, party members, or whatever. Now, today, you're chosen on the basis of what you can contribute. So it's an inverse solution where supply prevails. So we've got to harness this capacity to bring about sustainable human development. If I can refer back to the Stafford Research Institute, they said the only way out is innovation. But what's happening? What are European solutions? Well, actually, at the moment, what you see is stagnation. Since 1998, this is R&D expenditure in the Basque country, in Spain, and European average in 98 in our country. We had 111. Now it's 1.96 in 2008 in Spain. We've gone from 1 to 135. These figures are possibly outdated now. So we basically seem to be reducing expenditures. It's actually worse than stagnation. Why is that? Why is this stagnation happening in European economies? Well, I'll tell you why. European economies are stagnating because of the cut in this expenditure. Now, if you don't like this reason, I'll give you more reasons, as Groucho Marx said. Here's more. 0.45 European innovation. So much for the commitment to innovation. But, I mean, it's almost embarrassing to recall the figure that was promised by the European Union. There's a wonderful Chinese proverb. Because decisions were taken in due time, we've fallen behind, and we've got a lot of catching up on China. If we look back to history, China had the Bronze Age, and they had the Bronze Age about a millennium before we did. And here you go, here's the Chinese adage. It takes a century to create a nourishing environment in which talent could flourish. European solutions, well, I believe them to be neoliberals. I mean, I think the Americans are probably favorably surprised at the way in which we have emulated their neoliberal solutions to the crisis. A lot left-wing governments, in fact, are rolling out these neoliberal solutions, and they seem to have done it somewhat innocently. Look at what's happening in Spain or in Greece. There are cuts in public expenditure, social expenditure, capital, cuts in salaries, cuts in pensions. I think careful with cuts to the welfare state, and I entirely agree with what Ignacio Sotelo wrote in a wonderful book, which I would commend to you. It came out just this year. I think it's true. If we're going to engage in proper change, he says democracy and the social welfare state both depend on each other. The collapse of the welfare state would mean the end of democracy, end quote. And I firmly believe this to be true. So careful in accepting certain solutions, proposals, social state, job creation, competitiveness. You know, we shouldn't commit suicide. We need to increase productive employment, but we've got to see to what extent we can maintain the welfare state. But in no way should we dismantle the welfare state, because let me be clear, old Europe will not be a player in the new world stage just because we're a market and have a reference currency. But this won't make for leadership. Leadership will entail a vision based on human beings, based on the social welfare state, healthy economic development that doesn't leave people by the wayside, competitiveness and solidarity. That's an idea which I described to you in the Basque context, because that's the only way competitiveness can make sense. Competitiveness only makes sense to people if it's going to translate into a better world. Because as Beccattini said, empty vessels generate the most profit. Now, of course, they can only be sold once. Now, in politics, people will not forgive you if you're inconsistent and don't deliver on promises. That's my experience in my own country. When I've made mistakes, people have understood it. But if you're unable to be consistent or deliver on your promises, you end up in trouble. So training, innovation, internationalization, organized regionally, SMEs, funding, taxing, employment, venture capital. I think SMEs are central. The public sector, now careful here. Yes, I am concluding. We're seeing cuts in salaries. Now, that's not the problem in the public sector. The problem in the public sector is productivity. And all negotiations must focus on this, not just generating a legion of angry people. I mean, what are you going to end up doing? You know, get out the axe and cutting the wages of the public sector in other countries. I mean, consider what they did in Puerto Rico. They sacked 30,000 civil servants to get the budget in order. I would not advocate this for 1 second. Pensions, ditto. Now it's dead easy to slash pensions. That's what's happening in Spain. Now, it's not a question of freezing pensions or fixing retirement ages set in stone for everybody. We want to find ways to increase competitiveness, increase employment, and thereby establish a system of flexible retirement as of 60, so those that can and wish to may retire. Finally, scrutiny of the funding system. Isaskun asked me to wind up. Let me just say on this that the big question of this is speculation destabilizing? If so, why are we talking about it? Let's cut it out. We can talk about different kinds of transaction tax we want, but we do need one. That has to be implemented. And it's going to have an impact, obviously. But for me, it's got to be the financial systems that pay for bailouts, not the taxpayer. Are there problems? Yes. Geographical coverage, rates, what's taxed, how you manage it. But this is a very exciting debate on the role of the IMF, of the UN, of the World Bank, on, well, perhaps a new institution. These are all issues you're looking at here. And let's not forget that people would have never thought that Europe could conceive solutions of this time. But a lot of intellectuals defend this position today. There are other cancers we must battle in Europe. Red tape, but I don't have time to go into that. I have no time to tell you about Schubert's unfinished symphony. We need to take a serene look at things, careful with countries that punish failure. Tagore said, is that those that admit all errors also leave aside truth, because I think fear is extremely dangerous. careful with information. We can be overwhelmed by information. Today, in a sense, a lack of information is not a problem. It's an excess, a surfeit of information that's a problem. So let's be careful of turning into a machine that churns out diagnoses without actually acting on them, because that is hugely dangerous. I'll go to my last slide. It's from Einstein. All the empires of the future will be empires of knowledge, and only peoples that understand how to generate knowledge and how to protect it, how to find people who will generate this knowledge and getting them to stay will be successful. All others, however great their raw materials are, however great their histories are, will probably not continue to exist either with the same flags, borders, and certainly they will not exist with economic successes. I'll conclude. 2020 has established, in addition to local action, we need concerted action. Europe can succeed if it acts collectively as a union. I endorse this wholeheartedly. But look, I was a bit surprised to hear Gordon Brown see this, pleasantly surprised. It's our task to persuade people that millions of new jobs our countries need would depend on higher levels of cooperation between all members of the European Union. But I say this to my students in the USA. Do you know these people? They all know the previous side. Do you know these people? No. The problem is actually when I asked this question in the Basque country, they don't know them. I mean, how are we going to move forward without leadership? As Henry Kissinger, I'm no great fan of Henry Kissinger's, and of course he asked, whose phone do we dial if we want to ring the European Union? Perhaps Monet was right. If we were to restart the process of building Europe, we should begin with culture. In any event, I'll conclude with my recipe, more R&D. And the K is culture, culture being spelled with a K in Basque. Every people must contribute with their K. You can have a lot of experience in R&D and innovation, but values and culture are essential. They must underpin any political, economic, or social project that is in any way healthy. We in the Basque country have developed a model that is reasonably successful, and that's because we have deepened our identity. That's all. Thank you very much.
Eskerrik asko. Nuestro siguiente invitado.
Our second guest is Jordi Bajit, a distinguished economic consultant, has held posts in several universities and drawn up economic analysis for the University of Barcelona. He's also been a parliamentary assistant and advised in several different organizations, also in the Catalan Parliament as well. We are here before a professor who has very broad experience in the area, and I'm sure what he has to say will be very interesting indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, we are both economists, and as Ben Gurion said, sometimes the economists are only good at explaining what happened in the past and not very good at explaining what might happen in the future. That's the risk, and that seems to be what happened recently. Now, José Barache started his presentation with a fairly provocative statement, with a few general statements. But I'm going to start with what's happened with us in Catalonia, which is a region within the Kingdom of Spain. Now, what has happened? Well, it's fairly new. This is something in the last generation. This is an economic crisis. It's a new phenomenon. Those of us who were born in the 90s, are 20 years old now, people who are starting to, whose memories start at age 6 or 7, these people have lived through a time of growth. They know nothing about crises. They know nothing about economic cycles. As Ben Gurion said, there are periods of fat cows and thin cows, and we seem to have forgotten about this. We thought we were able to control all the economic forces, and we realized that this is not the case, that the crises will occur, and when they do, they will be severe. Turning now to Catalonia, well, it makes up 6% of the Spanish country, up to 20% of the country's total income. It's above the average for per capita income in the EU, but above the Spanish average income, but below the Basque country. Now, what are the other characteristics of the region? Well, the economy is based on industry, above all. And when we talk about possible recovery, possible exits from the crisis, we have to look at what our strong points have been in the past, and very often we forget what our strong points are when things are going well. We mustn't forget that we do have an industry, an industrial foundation, which, although it has decreased as a proportion of the GDP, it covers all areas of innovation, internationalization, and also has links with a service sector as well. And this is what we have to maintain. In terms of economic importance, to give you an indication, if Catalonia was an independent country, well, it would come above, its GDP would be the same level of Portugal, Greece, Ireland, or Denmark. No. Economists, what they're good for, they can explain what's happened over the last few years. What's happened to Catalonia over the last 10 years, from 1996 to 2007, 2008. Well, we were in a period of economic growth, but we were growing a great deal in terms of internal demand. Growth was based essentially on consumption rather than export, and this happened across the whole country. So current account deficit made up around 10% of GDP, which was one of the highest for developed countries. Our growth was generally due to the building industry. And we can see the importance of the building industry both in Spain and in the EU. It makes up around 7 to 8% of employment. In Catalonia and Spain, it was up to 12 or 13%. And yes, a lot of jobs were created. Spain had one of the highest rates of job creation in Europe at the beginning of the year 2000, at the beginning of the noughties. The Spanish economy as a whole, well, the yearly average was 3.5%, whereas the EU average was 1.5%. But what were these jobs? In Catalonia, a lot of these jobs were for low-skilled people with low salaries, and most of the employees were immigrants. Between 2000 and 2010, the population of Catalonia grew by about 1 million people, and most of these were immigrants. Before we were looking at a rate of about 2.8% of immigration, and now it's considerably greater. Since joining the euro, we have gone through a period of very favorable economic situation. Real interest rates were negative between 2002 and 2005, and access to credit was very easy indeed. This was unsustainable for the private sector, we were looking at 2.8 billion euros worth, and 6.6 billion of this was in the public sector. And 900 million euros in families. And this level of debt is quite considerable. Now, going through such positive times, we forgot what might happen to the economy in the long term. And what might happen if productivity fell. We had two priorities at the moment. That is getting out of the crisis, because we've seen what might happen. The second is we have to look at what's driving our growth, because Catalonia can no longer grow like it has in the past. If we look at the crisis in Catalonia, if you look at the intensity of the crisis and the effect on growth by looking at GDP, well, it's been similar in Catalonia and Spain, but quite different to the rest of Europe. The main factor is that jobs have fallen by about 2% in the rest of Europe, whereas we're looking at 9% fall in Catalonia itself. This is because, although the crisis is economic and has roots in finance, the consequences of the crisis are social. If you look at unemployment over the last few years, the rate of unemployment has almost doubled in Catalonia and the rest of the country, whereas we've looked at a loss of 2% in the rest of the Union. Now, we said that the crisis had hit the construction sector above all. Yes, that's true. A lot of jobs have been lost in construction. If you look at the percentages, we've got a 35.8% fall. A vast number of people who worked in the sector are now unemployed. But if you look at it in industry as well, we've got a fall of 21.3%. So many people who are working in construction before will simply won't be able to get their jobs back again. But what about people in industry? Because these people could get their jobs back. Because otherwise, what are we going to do? How to achieve recovery? If we look at those solutions which have been prescribed by those in the know, it seems that two things are true. Increase exports and clean up public finance. That is reducing expenditure. Now, when is this meant to happen? When employment, is it just when we're trying to increase unemployment that public expenditure should be cut? Is this an automatic cause and effect? Or should tax be increased? Yes, we could increase exports, but if everybody increases exports, who's going to be doing the importing? If all countries dedicate themselves to increasing exports, where do they go? Let's take a look at the situation as it stands. I don't think the internal demand is going to drive the recovery. With all the uncertainty that there is at present, recovery won't be possible. Now, will the world recovery carry us up with it? If we look at recent economic figures, we'll see whether that will be enough. In Catalonia, we also have to look at competitiveness in terms of prices. Before, we were talking about whether exchange rates are in favor or not, appreciation, depreciation, the dollar, the yen, and so on and so forth. But our exports go to, above all, 90% to the Eurozone. So it's not a question of the exchange rate. It's inflation and prices. This will affect whether we're more productive or not. Let's look at the most recent data. For the economy. Now, global manufacturing in the first months of 2010 increased, but is now falling. This is for the global economy, but the same thing is happening in Europe. If you look at the first few months of 2010, it seemed that everyone was saying we were climbing out of the crisis, but we're heading back into recession again. This is happening even in Germany, and if it's happening in Germany, well, what's going to happen in Spain? If the recovery does not happen, if we don't invest as much as Germany into manufacturing, well, Spain is just going to find itself in a very critical situation. Exports, these are not recovering. Well, they have been stabilized, but imports have fallen substantially. If you look at the second half of 2008 to the first half of 2010, you can see that's a very big fall. The trade deficit needs to be reduced, and the current account deficit too. If you look over the last few years, the current account deficit has been negative. So we have to think who our model should be. And well, the answer is Germany. If you look at the current account deficit there, Germany, that's great, but they have a current account deficit too. But they have managed to move from a deficit to a surplus, and I think we should be able to do the same. It's believed that with time the construction industry can recover. Well, we've got to have faith. But can we rely on recovery in the building industry? You can see that after many years of increased construction, we've reached stagnation. Let's take a look at the same pattern in Germany. We can see that for a good long while, the construction sector in Germany has also been stagnant. So no, we cannot rely on a recovery in the building industry to help the economy as a whole. Now, what has Germany done? They depended on recovery in industry. And we haven't done that. We haven't seen a recovery in industry. So what should we be doing? Well, we have to change our priorities. Where we relied on consumption in the past, we should move towards investment. Rather than imports, we should be looking at exports. We need to focus on sectors with greater added value, higher qualified jobs. We need to invest in training. We believed that we were the champions of growth. We were even lecturing other countries on how to increase growth and productivity. What have we got in Catalonia now that we can count on? Well, the industry. Our economy is fundamentally based on industry. The 3 I's: internationalization, innovation, and industry. Those are the pillars of our recovery. They will help us to exit the crisis. If we want to increase our productivity, then we have to focus on industry. All our policies need to be directed in along this route. Now, why industry? Well, because Catalonia is an industrial country. It was once the factory of Spain, and it is still an industrial country. It's got a good workforce, which are often as a result of the policies in the 19th century. We're in a manufacturing country because we don't have the mines, we don't have forests, energy resources, and because of this, we are focused on manufacturing and processing. We are a very diverse country. We have an enormous number of sectors and industries. No industry has more than 15% of the total sector. So we are not only diverse in terms of sectors, but also in terms of territory. We don't have an industrial hub and then nothing in the rest of the region. The industry is spread out across the entire territory and based around SMEs. 90% of our businesses have fewer than 50 employees. However, this system does have flaws, and we have to work on these. Now, what are the flaws? Well, we are not big enough to participate in a global market or to draw the greatest benefits that could be provided by internationalization or innovation. And in times when credit is scarce, we have very little access to it. There has also been an excess of focusing on the individual. In Catalonia, this has been the case. So that's the situation in Catalonia. We are an industrial country. And what does this mean for the future? We should continue to be an industrial country. Can we guarantee that this will be the case? Well, this depends. If we want to be an industrial country, if we look at the history of the region, before Spain joined the EU, it was said that if we joined the Union, this would be catastrophic for Spanish industry, but this wasn't the case. It was the opposite, in fact. Industry was strong enough and continued along the route toward irreversible industrialization. So the lessons of history should encourage us to make progress. If we want to have an industrialized country, we need industrial policy. Now, in a situation of crisis, when economies grow, when everything is going well, no one remembers industry and industrial policies. No one thinks about them. Politicians forget them. And when problems occur, when things go worse, then everyone turns to industry to say, help us out here, give us a hand. What we should do is, whether there's growth or not, whether there's stable growth or not, if we want to ensure growth in the long term, is to have a strong industrial policy. Now, the stress tests are very fashionable now. They're used by financial institutions, by banks. Last week, the Catalan industry was subjected to a stress test. The French consultancy of BP carried out the stress test and to see whether we would be able to bear the problems in the future. And their conclusions were that industry does indeed have a future in Catalonia, but it needs to adapt. Companies need to adapt. So what did they prescribe? Flexibility. Flexibility for business, the business world, for workers, for companies. But we also need flexibility in administrations. Because we cannot have one single policy for so many different situations. So on the one hand, we've got large companies whose main concern is that how can we get on this ladder that leads us to the international market. Their concerns are very different to the needs of SMEs who are most worried about how to access credit. So we need flexibility from business and from politicians too. So how should we draw up this industrial policy? Before I talk about what I think we should be doing, I'm going to start by speaking a little bit about what we should avoid doing. Firstly, we shouldn't accept deindustrialization as an irreversible phenomenon. If you look at the data over the last few years, where it seems that industry is shrinking as a proportion of the economy as a whole, we say that's normal, we're moving towards a service industry, but we have to think about what we want. Do we want sectors which have a greater added value? No, we will need to have the best telecommunications, the best engineers, the best of everything, but these bests are linked to a strong industrial presence. They are two sides of the same coin. We can have a good service industry if we have a good, strong industry as well. They go hand in hand. So we cannot give up on industrialization now. We have to fight to keep the industrial basis of our economy. However, this doesn't mean that we should not change anything, that we should stick to the industry as it stands, as it stood for decades now. In 50 years ago, 50% of Catalan's industry was a textile sector. This is not the case today. If we had struggled to maintain the textile industry, we would have failed completely. We have to look at our needs today. It isn't completely theoretical. The industry is based on our needs and our citizens. And we need to help these people transfer between different industries. We shouldn't be trying to maintain unviable production. There's always going to be someone who can produce our goods cheaper. That's always going to be the case. And so industries will always disappear. This is inevitable. Another attitude we should avoid is that of denying an important role to multinational companies in our country. They have driven the industrialization process, so why should we turn on them now when there's over 3,000 companies in Catalonia with foreign investment, when the 6 largest companies in Catalonia are multinationals? Now, naturally, there are risks. There are risks of outsourcing. Yes, that's true. But we can't boycott them, quite simply. This might be a very popular policy. It might be a vote winner. But, I mean, outsourcing, and it's going to happen anyway. What we can do is create the circumstances within which we can retain multinationals in Catalonia. There were a number of examples. In Saint-Gobain, Hewlett-Packard had a factory to manufacture printers. They have created jobs in the region, and more than 60% of their production actually comes from services. And they are world leaders in something in these great large format printers that you'll see in offices. And they are world leaders because of their factory in Catalonia. Another example, Sony makes TV sets in Catalonia. They say they're going to leave, but the factory has not closed down. 2 Catalan businesses will take over the factory, and together with Sony, they will continue manufacturing these TV sets, and later on they'll move on to specializing in something else. It could be cars, electric cars, whatever. But a multinational will have left. They've created jobs, highly skilled jobs, and this leads me to my next point. We should avoid trying to create clusters for all sectors and in all territories. Now, it's very nice as an intention, but it will lead to failure. For example, the aeronautics sector. An attempt was made to create a cluster in Catalonia, which failed. Because to do this, we need not just the leadership from our public powers, but you need the workforce as well. You need the people who are going to be able to carry it out, universities, businesses, and so on and so forth. So what can we do? Firstly, something which won't cost a penny. That is, we need to improve the idea that society has of industry. People think of industry as an evil. The only reason we want it is because it creates jobs. We should have to see industry as it is, however. It creates wealth and is a guarantee for the future. This is just a question of the necessary will and changing of values and attitudes. On the one hand, we have administration which has an enormous number of problems. We need to transfer this into an administration that can solve these problems based on industry. We need to encourage entrepreneurship as well. This shouldn't be a top-down measure imposed by governments. We need all of society to intervene here. Now, according to a survey carried out by a Catalan university, said that 90% of its graduates wanted to work in a financial institution. Now, the same survey carried out in the University of Columbia said that 90% of people wanted to be entrepreneurs. Now, this isn't the government that's dictated this. This is society and media which has led to this attitude. But people have but entrepreneurs have a negative image. They say they're speculators, they're evil. But I mean, well, you can have bad people everywhere. We must change this negative image of a business and entrepreneurs. Secondly, we need to improve access to finance for businesses. Now, funding for businesses is decreasing. However, funding available to the public sector has increased. Now, before it was said that the crises are useful because they sort the wheat from the chaff. But it hasn't been the case this time round. Companies which were well managed, which have a positive future, which are unlucky enough to be part of a sector which has been badly hit, these companies are systematically denied access to credit. And you can find examples all over. One survey said that 85% of companies have difficulty accessing credit. So 15% are unable to access, and 90% of companies have asked for guarantees. And for SMEs, 90% of the guarantees provided are personal guarantees, so people are mortgaging their own belongings and fortunes in order to continue with their company. Financing is not available. And this needs to change either with regulation on a European level, or if the private sector does not act, then the public sector needs to provide these guarantees. And so the financial institutions won't think twice before giving necessary funding to these companies. Now, my third point, innovation policies. We've got a lot to learn from the Basque country because they've given us an enormous number of examples of good practice. In Catalonia, we have seen growth. We're above the average, but we're far away from our goals. We want to be one of the best countries in the EU, but we're far from achieving that in all categories. In technological level of industry, we've only got 6.8% of total industrial employment and 8% of incomes. So we're looking at 2/3 of jobs and half of income. So we need to channel more resources in, but we have to be careful with this. We have to manage them better. If you look at the incentives on paper, the incentives when it comes to investing in R&D in Spain, well, they don't persuade anybody. If you look at the figures for the companies who take them up, well, the figures are very low indeed. Now, why is this? Because it's very hard indeed to manage these resources. And also, if you benefit from them, you're always going to have the tax inspectors coming up, knocking on your door a day later and saying, pay up, you'll owe us a good deal more in the future. So yes, we do need more resources, and it's going to be hard now. In a time of economic difficulties, it's always hard. So what we have to do, rather than having more resources, is to spend them better. Now, my colleague explained how research and science and innovation worked in the Basque country. In Catalonia, yes, some things have been done, but it's been very uneven. And it's not just that every government, but it's every member of government has changed the priorities. Now, firstly, we looked at how universities can research goods on the market, go to businesses. Then that was abandoned, and people turned to research centers which looked at different areas and saying if we have strong scientific bodies which are internationally recognized or of high prestige, these will attract good minds, and this will help increase our productivity as well. So we need to focus on technological centers. It all got very complicated. What we should be doing is simplify this system and increase the degree of coordination. And all we need for this is political will. And I think one of the positive points over the last few years is the creation of one body which will look at universities, businesses, and so on and so forth, looking at it's a technological center, taking a long-term approach, which means that quite independently of a change of government, change of members of government, the policies will remain consistent and coherent. And to improve the links between science and jobs, we should possibly be thinking about reforming the university system. We may produce very good tutors and professors at our universities, but they don't find it too easy to transfer into other sectors. So perhaps we need to change the model of governance for our universities. We should have a greater degree of flexibility so that our professors can transfer to business and then come back again, so they can choose whether or not they leave university, whether they start working for business, whether they collaborate with business, or the other way around, whether successful business people can come to universities and teach. Now, this is happening to a certain degree in Catalonia. There are problems, however, because there's a good deal of inertia. And the first thing you have to do, if something's moving very slowly in one direction, first of all, you have to stop it and then turn it around and head in the other direction. And the stage we're at now is applying the brakes. We do, however, have other alternatives to increase the effort going in to encourage exchanges between businesses and universities. Now, internationalization. We are a very open country, and this has been seen in the companies we have on Spanish soil. But once again, if we are strong in some areas, we do have weaknesses. Our exports are, well, 90% of them go to Europe. If then growth in the world is actually happening elsewhere, it's not happening in Europe. So perhaps we need to reorientate our exports elsewhere. Two sectors make up 40% of our exports. So perhaps we should try and reduce this percentage. We said that no sector makes up more than 15% of production in the region. So perhaps that's something a figure we should be aiming for exports as well. We've got 11,000 businesses which export in Catalonia, but over half of the companies which export, over half of the exports come from companies which have over 500 employees. So we need to work on SMEs in this area too. We need to ensure that Catalan businesses become stronger so they can export. We also need to attract more multinationals to Catalonia. We need a change in administration as well in order to increase our competitiveness. For example, if we want to get visas for delegations coming from other countries to attend trade fairs and so on and so forth, to exchange experiences with these people, often it takes 3-4 months or up to a year. I mean, come on. Once and for all, we need to reform our diplomatic services in Spain. Infrastructure. We look at where we're situated around the world. Some things can be done on computer, but in other areas, logistics are very important. For example, state investment has fallen in Catalonia. Often money allocated in a budget is not used. Every 4 years, investment falls, and many of the vital investments needed for Catalan economy is not being used. If you look at this map, you can see the Spanish infrastructure, and you can see it still takes the form of a radius. What we could do, we need to focus on the Mediterranean axis from Algeciras to France. You can see there's an enormous part of the route missing. If you look at on the eastern side as well, from the Basque country, a good deal of investment needs to be made here as well. It's going to take a lot of money. The high-speed trains cost a good deal of money. An American delegation came along to look at this, how to set up a high-speed train between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And while it was causing quite a headache for them. And they came and looked at the map and they thought, well, how are you going to do it? It's not just a question of setting up, but it needs to be productive and profitable. It's not just a question of setting up the infrastructure, we also need to manage it well. Now in Barcelona, there's an enormous airport. Why is this? Well, to get people to Madrid. There's an airline asked for authorization to fly to Seville and then fly directly from Barcelona to Sao Paulo, the economic capital of Brazil. It took over a year to get licensed to do so. When there was another airline which was working from Madrid, has 23 weekly flights to Sao Paulo. Now, why is this? Furthermore, when the airline was given the license, they gave a second license to another company. So we need to be able to manage the infrastructure, both national and regional administrations. Moving on. Education and training. Once again, a very different situation to the Basque country. We are working at a deficit here. 30% of our young people have not completed their schooling, and this is serious. We might be able to accept that the current generation is badly trained. Fair enough. But the next generation needs to be fully educated, fully trained, and if we have a failure rate of 30%, we're not going to achieve this. These policies are based on values such as authority, discipline, effort. These can't be solved by governments in one term. These are long-term values. But if we can focus on reducing school dropouts, we will find it easier to become the fully developed country we wish to be. We need changes to our business model as well. A few days ago in a Catalan paper, a study was printed of a Catalan business which said if you look at it from the top down, Catalan looks like a flower garden. Flowers everywhere in different sectors and different areas, but the closer you get, the closer you look, then you'll see that it's very focused indeed. There are a good deal of weaknesses. There's a great degree of technological intensity. It's focused on very few points. Because if you look closely, administrations and governments and politicians often prescribe certain solutions. They say we have to be more competitiveness, we need innovation, we need a greater degree of productivity. But in the area where governments are competent to act, that is in public administration, they don't do anything at all. So we have to start simplifying the system, modernizing public administrations. To conclude, in a world where everybody is competing, it's not just businesses that are involved. It's regions and national territories too. And we may have a good hand. We may have good infrastructure. But we need political power in the regions, and we need resources. We need financing. To be productive, you need to be close to power. Because if you have no power, if the power of businesses and industry will fail. Businesses and industry need resources. They need power. And Catalonia, over the last few years, has worked very hard to have greater political power in managing its own resources. And this is why we try to negotiate financing an agreement which should be better than the current agreement, which doesn't cover our own needs. If you look at the judgment of a constitutional court which says that that's not the way forward, that's not viable, well, they might think that we're going to give up. We're going to give up on trying to achieve a greater degree of autonomy. But no, that's not the case. We've found other ways forward to maintain our power and political control. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Jordi.
Thanks very much, Jordi. Well, we move on to a question and answer round. We have about 25 minutes, and what I would ask is that when you take the floor, you could say who you are. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Avar Godmanis. I'm from ALDE. I'm from Latvia. And I got 4 things asking the last speaker. The first thing is, as I've been told that Spain has a special agreement with China bilateral, which regulates the export-import Spain-China. It's not necessary to pay VAT. And if it is so I cannot understand how you will manage to improve your industry with such very nice conditions for importing Chinese goods, industrial goods, which are very hard to compete, especially for Spain. I'm not talking about other Europe, but this is very interesting. How long this agreement, is it existing, and how long this agreement will last? The second question is, how could you manage? The industry is capital-intensive thing. And to raise capital, there are 2 ways. One way, if you have a very active capital market, as in the UK or United States, that you could put shares on public placement, on private placement, and you could raise capital very easy. Or there's a second way, the banking system. I don't know how it's in Spain, but I do believe that the banking system has a majority of providing capital. I mean, on that basis. And my question is, how could you get this necessary capital to do the things what you said? Because actually this money is lost in the building and the mortgages, which is not easy to recover, absolutely not easy. And the banks will be not ready to switch backwards to the industry financing because actually they stuck with the money in the previous model of GDP. And you said about internationalization, could we understand that you will go this way to attract capital from outside? This I'll be happy to hear. And the last thing, is it possible to make competitive industry with the labor laws what you have? Because as far as I know, the last steps by Zapatero government is just to decrease the amount of months which a company has to pay for an employee in average salary, how long he has worked, up to 25, I do believe, years. But this is enormous money. You can't actually be flexible with the main expenditures on your how can I say, the main asset of competitiveness. It means how costly is your job, working job. It doesn't matter, it could be very well advanced educated and so, but at the end of the day, you cannot be flexible if you have such a labor law. I really will be very happy to get your answers, because we need your experience also in other part of the Europe, in the north, east. Thank you very much. So.
Sí, gracias. Empezaré por...
Thanks very much. I'll begin with your last question. I think other European countries have a good, or give us a good example about how we should do things. But I think we need to move towards negotiation. Yes, there can be more flexible legislation in certain countries, labor legislation, I mean. However, workers participate far more in the decisions taken by businesses. Now, there's a social system which can attenuate potential different difficulties that can arise when a worker is made unemployed. Spanish labor legislation is not a good way to attract foreign investment. There are problems. There are problems so when people leave the labor market. The labor reform that has recently been adopted avoids this issue. The labor reform overlooks the need for decentralization of labor relations. The main problem in Spain is that collective negotiations are centralized. It's the same for whether your company has 50 or 5,000 employments, and if the obligations imposed on companies are the same, the capacity for action is not the same. So what we need is something much more flexible and decentralized, where at the end of the day, the decisions taken reflect the real situation of companies. And I think employers and workers could easily reach agreement within such a framework, because otherwise you'll end up with a system such as we have, which protects workers a great deal, but when companies end up in difficulties, they can close. Now the trouble with that is that if you wind down a company, then you're in trouble, because you can't protect it. It can't ever get better if it's closed. Option 2, attraction of capital. Well, we need assets which are attractive. We need trained workers, good infrastructures, logistical centers that will save money, and an administration that will facilitate matters. But at the moment, that won't happen. Now, at the moment, there are financial institutions in other countries that may well be interested in projects, good and well. Otherwise, you need to have the competitive factors, and these have to be long-term, things like training, infrastructures, and so forth. Now, as far as your first question is concerned, I don't know if we have that agreement or not. I don't know. I think the problem of Chinese imports is altogether different. They produce at very low cost, and sometimes checks at entry into the European Union are not as rigorous as they should be. So what we need to do then is specialize in other words, doing something else, something with greater added value, because otherwise we simply won't be able to avoid this flood of Chinese product.
Dos cuestiones para...
2 points. As far as China and the Pacific more generally are concerned, I think the US and South Americans approach things differently. There is a problem of trade relations, but also in terms of trade treaties and so forth. I don't think Spain is particularly exemplary in this regard. Now, if I can be practical and look at potential models that will allow for the funding of the real economy and business, I can tell you what we've done in our own country, the Basque country. We wanted to harness venture capital for entrepreneurship. Also, the public administrations made available aids specifically for the funding of venture capital, in other words, for funding entrepreneurship. That's very important for developing new businesses. So creating new businesses is essential to us, as is training. So we need to find a way where a trained person and jobs can come together, and the creation of jobs. But I think the first thing you need is venture capital. I think entrepreneurship and venture capital are essential for the European Union. Secondly, this is something we were talking about earlier, the study of the Spanish Chambers of Commerce. And this dates back just a few days, published in October. 85% of companies have problems in accessing funding. We're not talking about major projects. We're just talking about basic running costs. Companies that are these companies are often competitive, and they can sometimes fall by the wayside because they can't have access to liquidity. So it's a question of how relations with the financial sector play out. Previously, they were lending money without any guarantees, and now, today, basically, you've got to show you don't really need the money before they give it to you. So we need to forge strategic alliances between public administrations, financial institutions, and businesses. What we did was to create agreements that would generate running cost credits for SMEs. So the role of public administrations was to assign public funds as guarantees if companies went bust. Now, we signed agreements with the financial institutions that were interested in participating in this scheme, though there was one important condition. The organization assessing the risk of the project wasn't attached to the financial institutions in question, but rather the reciprocal guarantees company, which is something in which the Basque government has a share. This has meant that the risk analysis has been independent. It's not carried out by the financial institutions. So on the basis of the guarantees provided by the Basque government, financial institutions are able and willing to lend. It's a new instrument. I haven't followed the issue in recent months, but certainly in the first half of 2009, this innovative initiative worked well. What we can't afford to do is for credit problems, because people are turned down all the time, end up meaning that companies that are perfectly viable go to the wall. Last year, this year, next year are going to be key years. We need to keep our productive fabric in good order because aggregate demand has gone down. But that's just an economic factor, but there is still continued need in the world. So those companies that tackle the situation and allow credit to flow to viable industries could come out of the situation far stronger. I think it's an opportunity for anybody who can find funding. They can consolidate their projects. Because if you go to the wall in 2009, 2010, you're going to have very serious difficulties in getting up and running again. But if you manage to stay alive, you'll probably stay alive for a very long time.
Yes.
Buenas tardes, Uriol.
Good afternoon, Uriol Junqueras from a coalition representing a number of regionalist parties in Spain. Thanks very much for organizing this event. I share the analysis that has been run by us today. Economy often reflects a state of mind. And so this brings to mind certain statistics, which has already been pointed out by Dr. Baget. Catalan experts are growing. Catalonia has received a prize for entrepreneurship. Thirdly, in terms of the institutional framework necessary to get out of the crisis, Catalonia has made substantial progress through a national pact for research and a national pact for education. And I have a question for our two guest speakers. You both referred to the need for a proper institutional framework that would generate trust and confidence. Now, I got the impression that Mr. Baget particularly said that there was a need for all of this to dovetail with the central government in Spain. So my question to both of you, do you think that that's going to be possible in the long term in a sustainable fashion? Is that going to be sustainable in Spain? Or do you think that any one-off agreement that could be beneficial for the short term will inevitably end up diminishing, so that the only long-term solution really is to find state-like structures for the Basque country and Catalonia within the EU?
Esfuerzo para hablar de ampliación interna de la Unión Europea.
Because I think we've got to see how we fit into the federal structures of the European Union. So I'd like to hear your opinion.
Sí, yendo a la primera parte de su...
Yes, if I could take up your initial remarks there. Are there grounds to be optimistic? I believe so. Yes, I'm an optimist. I think Catalonia will come out of the crisis all the stronger. We've got a lot of very capable people who are working very hard, and it's a question of harnessing all this power. Second question, can I just focus on economic issues? Obviously, political power that is properly rooted and that is in sync with society is a good thing. And have a competition in a globalized world must mean that each company has to think globally too. For Catalan companies, the Spanish market is not the sole objective. It hasn't been for a long time. for Catalan companies, it shouldn't just be the European market. They've got to think global. They've got to broaden their mindsets. And I think proper political power would help that too. The more united Europe is in this regard, the better it will be. Otherwise, we'll have fragmentary approaches to the same challenges, a scattergun approach which will prevent proper solutions. We need to step up unity. Mr. Ibarreche has to step out a minute. Well, that's what happens. I have to point out that at 6 o'clock our interpreters must leave us. We'll have to operate without interpreters thereafter. I can briefly repeat my question. I do beg your pardon. I had to pay a call of nature. Basic needs have to be covered. Yes, that's something we all have in common. Yes, I was talking about the need for institutional structures that are in sync with the economic realities of the Basque country of Catalonia. Do you think, Mr. Ibarreche, that it would be appropriate to find ways to dovetail with the central government in Spain? Because I think history indicates that this is difficult to sustain for the long term. Wouldn't it be better for us to start speaking explicitly of the need for state-like structures for our territories within the framework of the European Union? In other words, it's a question of internal enlargement of the European Union.
Creo que el debate en estos momentos en Europa es un debate abierto.
Well, I think this is an open-ended question and debate, and not just for Catalonia, and the Basque country, for Flanders, for Wallonia, for Scotland. Greenland is part of Denmark, and Greenland decided to leave the European Union, and it's a broad-ranging issue. If we're to achieve sustainable human development, I think the deepening of Catalan and Basque identity is, of course, directly relevant. Now, of course, a political project can be backed up by a given kind of framework, but at the end of the day, it's a question of striving for balanced development of our societies. But I think intellectuals throughout the world are beginning to accept this. Everybody knows that it's not by giving up who you are, what language you speak, that you're going to ensure your place in the world, your place being that of Germany, that of the Basque country, whatever. It is by acknowledging this identity that you can play a role. This is the case. And don't forget that the founding fathers couldn't come to realize their plan for a federal Europe. They went to the meeting in The Hague and ended up having to accept something based on nation states. But it cannot be exclusively that. The role of nations, be we stateless or otherwise, is something that is going to grow over time. Why is that? Because there is a perfectly legitimate political aspiration there. One which directly ties in with sustainable human development. Societies will demand more sovereignty because they will see that generates welfare and wealth in their societies. Catalonia and Basque can't be built up against France or against Spain, but rather it's a nexus. And certainly what we don't want is zero-sum nationalism. We can only succeed if others fail. No. For the Basque country, it's essential for France to do well, for Spain to do well, for Germany to do well, for the European Union to do well. It's only somebody with a very blinkered outlook that can be pleased that things are going very badly in the country or community next door. We need to develop our own different projects in the nations, the European Union, which are fully part and parcel of the European Union and broader regional approaches. I mean, after all, what is Europe other than a regional response to globalization? So the notion of independence, of what a state is, of sovereignty, can have a variable geometry and also something radically different to what this meant in the 20th century. If you say, well, the Basque country and Catalonia can participate in the building of Europe, regardless of whether we are a state or have state-like structures or not. Or perhaps we should look at this conversely. Can state structures actually be a hindrance in Europe? Because if it is, people say, well, wait a minute, I don't think I should be a state, but if I'm not allowed to get on with things, if I can't contribute in my own way, I'm not interested. If we can conceive participation mechanisms, then at the end of the day, that may well be eclipsed by the importance of the structures that you use. Because today, what's happening is that there are certain states that use their ability to veto the capacity of their communities in working nationally, internationally, or in the European Union. And I think history will prove them wrong. I think there are nations that want to be players in the European Union. There can be no doubt in my mind that our peoples are favorable to the European project. Let me give you an example. The Basque people on both sides of the Pyrenees voted in favor of the constitutional treaty. I mean, I think the current treaty doesn't deserve that name. I mean, I think constitutions are only constitutions if they've been accepted by their peoples. But what we have at the moment isn't a constitutional treaty. In any event, when this issue was put to the vote, the Basque people on both sides of the Pyrenees voted in favor of the constitutional treaty. They said, well, wait a minute, but Article 2 is just about citizenship and states. But we said, yes, but it's far more important for us to have a proper constitutional structure in the European Union, because for non-state nations, Europe is a roof with a lot of leaks, but I think it's better to, that roof is far better than sleeping outdoors with no shelter at all, which is, of course, what would happen to all of us, including big countries like Germany and France, if we don't have the European Union. It's easy to criticize the European Union, but I think it's a source of trust and confidence. It's not about denying the role of states, rather it's about revamping it and revamping the identities of the peoples of Europe. I feel persuaded that peoples are the natural allies of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Vladimir Jovchev from Bulgaria. My question, actually, I have two questions towards both the speakers. You both mentioned how important it is to coordinate the work between universities, administration, and businesses so that you can promote innovation. And you said that, you mentioned about technological center that should help in the coordination in the long term. Have you created such a body in Catalonia, and how is it operating in terms of coordinating between these institutions? And my second question is, you said that it's important to renovate and to develop your industry. And could you tell me if you have certain specific industries that you would like to invest to develop rather than other? Because you said that back in the 50s, the textile industry was the one that was the most developed, and now things have changed. Thank you.
A ver.
Well now,
Los tecnológicos.
technological centers. Technological centers have been created in We began in Catalonia with certain kinds of laboratories in Catalonia over 100 years ago. Now they're part of the sector or have been established by a particular industry. There's those, and there's those that have been created at the behest of local governments or by local governments and universities. In Catalonia at the moment we have some 40 such technological centers. Now, my point is these are cutting-edge centers that can engage in self-funding, and could they just provide services to by charging them? There are a lot of these technological centers that require administrative aid if they receive assistance from central administration.
Sector que
The interpreters regrettably have to leave.
que es el de los centros de las propias empresas. Por tanto, garantizar una mayor colaboración entre los diferentes centros de las empresas y después que desde...
Sorry to interrupt, there's no translation.
And then, after that, the government, but also universities, research centers, and all the agents directly involved in research and development, they must to cooperate and decide one kind of line, only one political of research and development. Second question, the subsectors of the industry we have to promote. I think it's better the initiative they must come for the whole industry and the only industry. So I think the better thing is the government must create the environment to develop all initiatives, not only biotechnological sector or aeronautical sector. We have to emphasize all the initiative that becomes to the society.
La última pregunta, sí, ya la vamos a hacer y por lo menos...
Sí, buenas tardes. Juan Antonio Salazar, de la Dirección General de Empresa e Industria de la Comisión Europea y antes del Parlamento Vasco y de la Universidad del País Vasco. Querría hacer una pregunta. Primero querría agradecer a ambos ponentes la oportunidad de haber escuchado intervenciones interesantes, algo que nos sucede todos los días en este ambiente. Y querría hacerles una pregunta un tanto tangencial, pero no del todo, sobre todo en relación a su papel de ambos ponentes como miembros de organizaciones políticas. En las dos intervenciones se han oído críticas, bastante moderadas, por cierto, sobre las administraciones públicas, el papel que han desempeñado en relación con esta crisis, el papel de los organismos internacionales y también el papel o las responsabilidades que determinados comportamientos u opciones económicas han tenido en el desarrollo de esta crisis. Pero me gustaría escuchar también cuál podría ser el papel de los poderes públicos, el papel que han jugado, o más bien el papel que deberían jugar en adelante los poderes públicos, los gobiernos, por ejemplo, o los partidos políticos muy especialmente, tanto en el caso vasco como en el caso catalán. ¿Qué modelo y, sobre todo, qué nuevo modelo podrían los partidos políticos ofrecer a la sociedad? ¿Qué modelo modificado, mejorado y, sobre todo, regenerado podrían ofrecer a la sociedad? Gracias.
Yo no tengo ninguna duda, es el liderazgo compartido, lo que las administraciones y partidos políticos tienen que ofrecer a la sociedad y no siempre lo ofrecemos. Tenemos una cierta tendencia a tener miedo a medirnos, a evaluarnos y lo que no se mide no se mejora. Y por lo tanto, al igual que ocurrió en nuestro país con la calidad, tenemos que, sobre la base de un liderazgo compartido, liderazgo público ejercido de la mano con la iniciativa social, en su caso o en el caso de la innovación, de la mano de los centros tecnológicos, de la mano de las universidades, pero en definitiva un espacio de liderazgo compartido que establece también de manera compartida los objetivos y establece y define también de manera compartida las propias consignaciones presupuestarias de estas actividades definidas como estratégicas para el país, que no son tantas. Yo creo que hay elementos que fundamentalmente tienen importancia capital para ser definidas como estrategias de país más que como estrategias de partidos o más que como estrategias de gobiernos. Fundamentalmente yo creo que, por un lado, la estrategia de formación y empleo. En segundo lugar, creo que la relacionada con la innovación, internacionalización. En tercer lugar, la sostenibilidad. Y en cuarto lugar, las políticas de igualdad requieren necesariamente de liderazgos compartidos entre las administraciones públicas y las administraciones privadas. Esos liderazgos compartidos tienen que ser para definir, para desarrollar y para evaluar. Al margen de que las iniciativas y los proyectos que se evalúen sean de titularidad pública o de titularidad privada. Me explico. Los proyectos que debamos hacer en materia de innovación no deben ser solamente gestionados, reflexionados, decididos desde un liderazgo público-privado, sino evaluados también desde un punto de vista público-privado. Yo creo que ese es el nuevo espacio, el de liderazgo compartido, que corresponde a las fuerzas políticas y a las administraciones públicas, frente a unas actuaciones en general realizadas en muchas ocasiones de manera unilateral y al margen de la propia participación ciudadana en ellos.
Estoy básicamente de acuerdo con él. Y para poner algunos ejemplos, ya que ha preguntado como miembro de fuerza política, pues miren, desde Convergencia y Unión, estando en la oposición, esta legislatura hemos llegado al Pacto Nacional sobre Innovación y Ciencia y Desarrollo, que intentará marcar pues las líneas en el medio plazo por dónde debe desarrollarse la actuación política. Y también desde la oposición hemos aprobado la Ley de Educación de Cataluña. Y aquí quien no lo ha aprobado totalmente junto y unido ha sido el Gobierno de la Generalitat, porque de los tres partidos que lo forman, uno votó en contra, dos votaron a favor, pero el Partido de Iniciativa per Catalunya votó en contra y se desmarcó. Por tanto, no ha habido una posición única por parte del Gobierno, pero a pesar de esto nos hemos puesto de acuerdo en crear también un marco general para la educación, que no pase, como pasa en el Estado, que cada cambio de gobierno implica un cambio en la ley de educación, ¿no? Para crear un marco estable, en el que se sientan las bases seguras. Y después, debemos aprovechar todas las fuerzas de la sociedad para ir conjuntamente. Por tanto, y la iniciativa privada, la iniciativa social, deben participar en todos los ámbitos de decisión, no solo públicas, sino también de gestión.
Con esta última pregunta y respuestas, agradeceros a todas y todos, de verdad, el haber estado hoy aquí, el habernos acompañado a que esta jornada, fuera bien y tuviera lugar algo de debate, por lo menos al final, y agradecer a los ponentes, a Jordi y a José Ibarretxe, el haberse acercado hasta el Parlamento Europeo para trasladar sus reflexiones de las que hemos aprendido, y además que en grandes líneas yo creo que tienen muchas cosas en común, como enfrentar la crisis económica. Ante la crisis económica uno no tiene que dejar de ser lo que es. Nos ocurrió, hicimos las mismas reflexiones con el tema de la política industrial en los finales de los años 80, y Euskadi sigue siendo fundamentalmente industrial, pero con innovación, con formación, con innovación y con internacionalización. Por tanto, bueno, yo creo que yo también he tomado buena nota de las reflexiones y espero que nos haya servido pues, para aprender, para compartir y para construir entre todos, también desde el Parlamento Europeo, pues, un futuro mejor para Europa y al final para nuestras naciones, pueblos, regiones y en definitiva para el mundo. Mila esker guztioi benetan. Besarka bat. Agur.